Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our presentation today. I appreciate you being here. We have three presenters with us today. We're going to be talking about multiflora rose management, 5 years of prescribed goat grazing from the perspectives of three collaborators. So again, thanks for being here. This program coordinator at the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. I will be introducing our speakers here in just a moment, but I did want to just take a little bit of time and mention that we do have a Q&A feature that is available to type in any questions that you may have for our presenters, and you can do so throughout the webinar and also at the very end. And then at the end of the presentation, we will go through and answer as many questions as we are able to. So I'll just take a few minutes here and just introduce our speakers, and afterwards I will turn things over to them and they can kick off the presentation. So with us we have Rich Bowden. Rich is a professor of environmental science and sustainability who arrived at Allegheny prior to the evolution of the dinosaurs. He loves teaching hands-on and project-based courses and making students' heads spin as they explore solutions to vexing environmental problems. Rich has a Bachelor of Arts in Biology and Environmental Studies from Northland College in Wisconsin, a master's degree in aquatic ecology from Michigan Technological University, and a PhD and master's degree from the Yale University School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. Rich has taught at Allegheny College for 33 years and conducted research on forests and soils for 4 decades, authoring 65 peer-reviewed papers. He has done long-term research projects related to forests, carbon and acid rain, conducted research on sites in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Oregon, and works with colleagues in Toronto, Oregon, Massachusetts, China, and Hungary. And in his spare time, Rich enjoys kayaking, long bicycle rides, cross-country skiing, coaching Special Olympics, hiking in the forest, vegetable gardening, and putting venison in his freezer. So that's Rich. We also have with us today Gavin Deming. Gavin is the executive director of Allegheny GoatScape, a small nonprofit organization established in early 2017. He has also worked for the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy from 2008 to 2018. It was during this time of working to improve and beautify community green spaces with neighbors and partners that the idea of utilizing goats to eat up unwanted vegetation became a reality. Gavin has a BSW degree from Hope College in Holland, Michigan, and an MSW degree from University of Pennsylvania's School of Social Policy and Practice. Originally and always a Michigander, Pittsburgh has been home for Gavin since 2005. Gavin loves being with his spouse and kiddos, his faith community, playing and watching international football, Charles Wasaki puzzles, making popcorn and pies. Gavin believes that the earth and its people can heal at the intersection of environmental stewardship and intentional community building, and hopes that goats are playing a small part in this. And finally, we also have with us today Yianni Laskaris. Yianni has been the wildlife biologist at the Erie National Wildlife Refuge since February of 2022. He earned his BS in environmental science from Northeastern University and his MS in coastal, marine, and wetland studies from Coastal Carolina University. Yianni has worked intermittently with the Fish and Wildlife Service since 2011 and briefly for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. Prior to his time at Erie, Yianni worked at 4 other wildlife refuges within the National Wildlife Refuge System in Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Jersey, mainly coordinating research and monitoring of coastal wetland restoration projects, marsh birds, and beach nesting birds. As the wildlife biologist at Erie, Yianni manages the refuge's biological program, which includes several inventory and monitoring projects, including freshwater mussel and water quality monitoring, breeding bird surveys, and invasive species management. So that's just a brief overview for our 3 presenters today. So thank you all for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Gavin to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited that we get to discuss this project. It's one of the favorite things that I do, and it's because of the collaborative nature. what we do. So next. So I am the executive director of Allegheny GoatScape, and our mission is to reduce invasive and unwanted vegetation in public spaces and vacant lots utilizing goats for browsing. Go ahead and next. And we incorporated into the very beginning of 2017. There was a predecessor in Pittsburgh. They were called Steel City Grazers, and they were doing what we're doing now, only on a smaller scale. They had a smaller herd of goats. And in one way, how we started our origin story is that we hired, as the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, the previous iteration of what we're doing now, Steel City Grazers. And we had them clean up a small area in Pittsburgh so that we could plant native vegetation as part of a red bud restoration project. And we brought in the goats. They ate up everything that was in this relatively small space, quarter to half an acre. And I was smitten. They were quiet, they were friendly, and I knew that they would do a good job because we'd seen a little bit of previous history, but just the draw from the public and just the excitement around something that wasn't necessarily dogs and cats in a more urban setting was really exciting, both for me, even though I grew up in the country, but also for a lot of passersby and interested folks. And so, yeah, we were able to hire them, and then I just started to do a little volunteering, and they decided to take a different path in life, but we're hoping that it could continue the goat work. And so I was able to make that happen and turned it into a nonprofit organization rather than a small LLC, so that we could raise funds and be part of fundraising efforts and collaborations in a way that, I mean, it was my background. I have as Amy mentioned, a master's in social work, but the focus on that degree is resource development through nonprofits. So it was in my wheelhouse to be a 501c3. Plus, it allows us to raise funds in ways that a small business might not be able to. Next. So as it stands now, our team consists of 5 small herds. And we have Team Hobo, Team Diamond, Team Sunshine, Pete and the Golden Goats, and House Balthazar. Most of these are named after their donkey protector, miniature donkey. One of them does not have a donkey. So spread across 5 herds, we have 54 goats. And then we have, including myself, only 4 human staff members. So as such, we need and rely on a lot of wonderful volunteers to ensure that we can do what we do. And we are just running very busy, and we always want to keep our animals moving from project to project. So it makes for a lot of work, but it's really wonderful to be able to work with animals, especially in the settings that we are in. But that's our small little team. Next. And we primarily work in Allegheny County, and as you can imagine, a lot of that has to do with the capacity that we have. A lot of our work is happening in the city parks and green spaces around the city. That includes greenways. And then right now, actually, we are currently in Hayes Woods, the newest park in Pittsburgh. And that's exciting to be able to work alongside both the city and the nonprofit city park manager, Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, to be able to start to make inroads and bring in some restoration efforts there. We're probably most known these days for working along the Greater Allegheny Passage Trail along the Mon River in Homestead, right along the bike trail and river there. But we do a lot of institutional properties as well. We regularly go to Carnegie Mellon. We've been at Duquesne University, and we have a great longstanding project relationship with Penn State University, Greater Allegheny, among others. And we do a few special projects outside of Allegheny County, and we'll, of course, talk about more. And that includes Erie National Wildlife Refuge. This year, we were also along Chartiers Creek in Canonsburg in Washington County. And we've done a few other projects outside of our Allegheny County service area, such as Flight 93 National Memorial and Johnstown Flood National Memorial, and a few county parks in Westmoreland County as well. But because of our size, we tend to stay in Allegheny County, and we actually do not do any private properties outside of Allegheny County. We do a few private properties per year, but because of being a nonprofit, and also we feel like the most the greatest benefit lies in doing public work, and that provides for greater collaborations as well. Next. So if you can see the little dots on this map, this is where we worked just this year alone. We did 42 projects, which is no small feat among 5 herds. And our working period is from late April till basically there's nothing left to eat. So for spots where honeysuckle is prevalent, that's where we work the latest. So we'll be working probably till first or second week of November. And that's pretty typical for what we've been doing for the last few years. So you can see most of our projects are both by number and by size public. And a lot of those are the city projects in the city parks. And that would, of course, include Erie by our standards too. Next. And of course, the question comes up, why on earth are we even doing this? We feel and know actually that goats just naturally eat a lot of things. They don't eat everything. That's a misnomer, but they eat many, many things. And there is a huge issue with invasive species in our landscapes. Probably all of you know, given the nature of the seminar, they cloud out our native plants. They decrease biodiversity. They pull down many trees, and generally it just it's not healthy for our local natural ecosystems, whether that's in the middle of the woods or in an urban area. And so because goats eat really well, they make good for stripping a lot of the vegetation. They are not grazers, they're actually browsers, so they prefer woodier things and forbs, but on occasion they'll eat grasses, but definitely their wheelhouse is woodier vegetation. So they strip things, and then our team, as well as volunteers, will help cut because they do not have that capacity to cut things or dig things up. So it does require some human intervention as well, but they do the bulk of the clearing the palette, as I like to say, allowing ourselves and our partners to see what we're actually working with. So goats also are great because they have essentially 4 stomachs. And so when they eat things, they're really digesting it. That's good because they're just removing a lot of the green, but they're also digesting in a way that most of the what comes out on the other end is what's considered cold, meaning you could put it right on your garden. It's ready-made fertilizer. So this is great for creating compost, and it's also great because if they're eating things such as seeds that normally a bird would carry off and populate somewhere else, the goats are burning that stuff up in their system. So that's definitely an added bonus. And then of course you have why I kind of was really interested in at the beginning was they don't require any kind of chemicals that we're putting into the air. or in some cases, the ground or the water table. So they're just doing what they do, and we're avoiding any herbicides and pesticides. And of course, as you can see, Cowboy is actually up on a ledge, probably 6 feet high right there, because he can do that. Goats are very good at climbing. And so they're able to get to a lot of places that humans aren't normally able to get to. It seems, and I can't verify this in all circumstances, but in a lot of cases, the manual labor from humans to do a lot of this invasive removal is far more expensive, simply because the typical Western Pennsylvania landscape is very difficult to maneuver at times. Next. So I just want to share with you a few of the invasive species that we target. Of course, we have knotweed, and knotweed is prevalent, especially in disturbed areas all over our region. And they eat, the cool thing with knotweed is they eat it down just about to the ground. They might leave a little stalk, but they're able to break off the stalk and then eat every part of it. So that's great, because it really clears out spaces that have knotweed. Now, if you know the nature of knotweed, it will come back. But we have noticed in spaces where we do return, the plants are weakened. And we do try to schedule our projects so that we can do the most damage. So we try to get in before seeding happens in the fall with knotweed. Stiltgrass isn't as great when it comes to goats. They still eat it. And of course, our donkeys do love it. So that's a good thing. But they will eat it if it's on site for sure. Bush honeysuckle is another one that's, as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of where we're at now. All of our projects are bush honeysuckle heavy, because it's one of the last plants to have leaves on it. But it certainly is a plant that has really shaded out a lot of native vegetation. Next. Porcelainberry, the grapevine lookalike, is, the more that we're out here doing it, the more it seems like it's around. And the hard thing about porcelainberry, and really a lot of these vines, is they will intertwine with quite an array, especially the bush honeysuckle and knotweed. But the goats love it. It's probably one of their favorite foods, honestly. And so we have to do a lot of cutting, though, when it comes to porcelainberry, because we'll find, if we're in a site that's both porcelainberry and knotweed, they might eat everything they can below, but even if we cut the knotweed for the goats, everything's still standing in the air because it's been woven together by the porcelainberry. So it's good that we're mitigating that, but certainly one of our most problematic invasives that we tackle. But I feel good when we do tackle it. Privet, of course, is just all over the place, and the goats eat it. It's a little harder for goats just because of how spindly the plant is, but they still like it. And then bittersweet vine is another one that they like a lot, but we often are cutting it out of the trees just because it climbs very quickly. So whenever we can, we cut it both kind of at height, kind of above our head, but then also at the ground level, to give trees a fighting chance and allow the goats to eat whatever they can off that part. Next. Oh, I do want to share a few other plants that we target include buckthorn, autumn olive, and then small ailanthus. Goats do like ailanthus, but generally ailanthus grows so fast that they're not able to get to the branches. So we are often cutting down trees, or if it's small enough, they'll eat that pretty much to the ground. Well, of course, we'll be talking about for today includes the Multiflora rose, and the site on the right, I believe, is when they arrived to Erie National Wildlife this spring. Multiflora rose is one of my least favorite plants. It's beautiful. It smells amazing. And I can't tell you how bloody I've gotten because of this plant that you don't even realize is there until it really digs into you. But thankfully the goats love it too. The thing about goats and multiflora rose is they eat it, and the way they eat. So goats lack teeth on the side, so they will actually grab it and pull it in and kind of pull it around so they're not getting stuck with the thorns. But goats do have very thick inner mouths, so if they do, they generally don't get pricked the way you and I would get pricked on our skin. Now, the goats don't necessarily go too deep. Like, say if there's a huge stand like that multiflora rose picture on the left, they probably wouldn't stick their head in there. They would eat as much as they can around the outside. But like you or I, we would not stick our head right headlong into a big bush of honeysuckle. So they generally do not get everything. And of course, like I mentioned, they don't have the capacity to cut it, but what they're doing is clearing it for further manual labor. And when it's smaller, as we'll see with the additional presentations, it's easier to manage because it hasn't grown into this enormous ball of thorny pain. Next. So I want to share briefly how we do it. We go out and assess sites and then do some very basic mapping. The picture on the left is maps created for one of our parks in Polish Hill in Pittsburgh, kind of where we'll go. And this allows us to see sizing as well as how much fence we need for a site. And then when the time comes, well, we schedule our projects usually in the winter prior to the year. So we're working right now actually on we're beginning to work on our scheduling now. But when the time comes, we cut swaths if needed through whatever vegetation is there, or make use of yards if possible. And then we set up an electrified, very malleable fencing. As you can see, my coworker Hillary there, that's pretty steep hill. Thankfully, only a few of us have to do that work, but there are times when humans have to get involved with the climbing too. And we just put up the fencing, create a barrier, four-sided barrier where we have agreed to work. And then we when the time comes, then we let our goats in, and then they have at it. And then we have them eat until there's nothing left to eat. And we've done this long enough so that we roughly know how long it will take. Certainly there's a little variation based on weather, based on density of vegetation, topography, but we generally say that it takes 2 weeks to do a full acre with the size of herds that we have. Next. So I just want to show you a few before afters, and of course you see there, that's almost entirely knotweed. And so that's before we arrived, or before the goats arrived. Go ahead, next. And then that's the same space, kind of on the other side, but the same space after the goats spent a few days in there. And that site's about a half acre. They've been on this site for a few years now. So yeah, they make quick work of that space. And you can kind of see on the left side of that slide a tree barrier. So the neighborhood group, as we're eating up the knotweed, they've been able to plant trees. They want to make a food forest there. And so the goats are helping with that. And so we kind of edge in a few feet every year. So the goats do less and less work. Next. So this is another site. This is, where is this? I'm trying to remember where we're at here. I am blanking on where we are here, but oh, it's Highland Park. This is actually later, after this, I'll be removing these goats from the site to go to Hayes Woods. But yeah, this is Highland Park, just a dense array of a lot of different things, mile a minute, porcelain berry, privets in there. I mean, it's kind of the whole smorgasbord. Next. Then you can kind of see they just get at it and take away a lot of that vegetation. And again, we do a lot of cutting as well. There are a few things, especially at this time of year, that they will, like you can see a little bit of green up front. It's probably because that site has a lot of snake root in it. And snake root is one of those things that the goats just don't touch. And so if there's dense pockets of snake root, they just work around it. But for the most part, they really clear the site out, which is great. Next. Oh, this is where we'll be talking about soon. Erie National Wildlife. Next. You can see they definitely remove a lot of that greenery. Next. So even though this site itself was before we started, it's a good show of both the before and after, but also what I love about doing this, and that's the collaboration and management of projects that Yianni and Rich will be talking about in a minute. But so this was Polish Hill, West Penn Park, and you can see beforehand, then after the goats spent a few weeks there because it's a large area. Next. So what this allows us to do is go in and restore the space, or at least improve the space. So right here you have volunteers kind of both cutting and removing the vines that were there, but then also planting container trees, which is awesome. And you can see the date was 2016. The goats finished that earlier in the year, so it was a quick turnaround. So in terms of our projects, some of them are return sites, a lot, especially knotweed. And of course, Erie National Wildlife, but there are some groups that we partner with, like Pittsburgh, who think of the goats as a one-time palette cleaning thing, and then they get in there and plant their trees. But then from there, because the goats can't return to a spot where trees have been planted because they'll eat the trees, so they have developed a management plan where they keep the invasive species down using manual labor, and with the hopes that once the trees are mature enough, there won't need to be as much manual labor. Next. You can see this is early on when they, same spot where they planted them. You can see some of the trees popping up out of the containers, protected containers. Next. And then this was a few years, I think a year after that. So you can still see there's a little knotweed, but the trees are really maturing and getting large, doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Next. So that's us. If you want to learn more, we do have a lot of this information on our website. And then of course, we're on social media. But I believe now I'll pass it on to Yianni to talk more about what's actually happening at Erie National Wildlife Refuge.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yianni Laskaris. I'm the biologist here. Erie National Wildlife Refuge is one of over 750 refuges across the nation. And, our mission as part of the National Wildlife Refuge system is to protect resources and animals for the public benefit. So I'm going to talk to you more about the project and where it was located on our refuge. Our refuge is located in the French Peak watershed, about an hour and a half north of Pittsburgh and an hour south of Erie. That's our refuge shown on the right hand in yellow. And I'm going to be talking about a site that we've been working on with Allegheny GoatScape that's located in our Sugar Lake division, which is just outside of Meadville, Pennsylvania. The invasive program is just one of 6 main projects that I focus on as part of my biological program at the refuge. So, a lot of the work they'll be talking about, we're pretty limited in our resources and our staff and our funding to do more work beyond just the GOAT project. So that definitely restricts some of the progress we can make with the multiflora. So I'm going to talk more about that too. But essentially we do this project with the help of seasonal interns that we get each year and can hire on for about 12 weeks to help us map out invasive species, perform early detection, rapid response of invasive species, and also to treat those invasive infestations through a variety of methods, including biological, like you'll hear about today, but also using herbicides and mechanical. The process usually starts off with grid mapping to identify problem hotspots. So I'll talk more about that on a following slide, but the things that we had to consider before even jumping into this project were, what type of invasives we had. So, goats, like Gavin said, can eat a range of different invasive species, but we also needed to make sure that our area of interest could support, a food source for the herd for the duration of the project. So we needed an area with a lot of invasives for them to sustain them. We also needed to consider whether our site was dry. So goats don't like wet areas. They usually avoid them if possible. And our site and most of our refuge is wet. So we needed to find a location that was fairly dry. There are areas that goats will stay away from. So, well, that was all part of the process. We also considered the proximity of groups to us. Allegheny GoatScape is located less than 2 hours away. And that was important to us because we needed them to check in on the goats and be able to do that pretty reliably in case, something were to happen. So having them nearby was definitely something we needed. And then, like Gavin said, it's not a one-stop shop when it comes to invasive treatment. 4 to 5 years is recommended for multiflora rose treatments. So that's what we decided to go with. I jumped into this project in year 4 of 5. So there was a biologist before me, Melissa Althouse, who kind of helped put this all together through happenstance and research. Basically, we were in a push regionally to do this grid mapping method that I'm talking to you guys about. And there's a need on our refuge to also protect water quality. And that's because we're in the French Creek watershed, which is a really biodiverse watershed. We've got 6 federally threatened and endangered freshwater mussel species that live in the streams and creeks around our refuge. So anything that we do in terms of invasives management, we would like and prefer to minimize the amount of herbicide that we use so that doesn't end up in water sources around the refuge. So that was a huge need and a huge reason why we were seeking out alternative methods to treating invasives on the refuge. And that's why Melissa reached out to Allegheny and GoatScape to start this project. There were some other things that we also needed to consider, like potential site hazards. So Gavin didn't touch upon this a little bit, but at the site, we wanted to avoid areas with that harbor plants that are toxic for goats. So there are species like false hellebore and skunk cabbage that are found along the banks of streams and in wet depressions of forests that are on the site that we're going to talk about that goats can get into because it's not good for them to consume. And we also had to be mindful that there are other species like, for instance, native black cherry, which can potentially be toxic when it dies and the wilted leaves fall on the ground. So there are a lot of things to consider when it comes to protecting the goats and keeping them healthy while they're on the site as well. So the culprit, I'll just talk to you guys a little bit more about multiflora rose. It was introduced to our country from Japan and other parts of East Asia in the mid-1800s. It was recommended by the predecessor to NRCS as a form of management, putting in for farm hedges to keep cattle and other grazers, in a certain spot. And it was also originally used as a rootstock for grafting ornamental rose species. So it ended up obviously becoming an aggressive and prolific spreader. It primarily spreads through seed dispersal. So that's one of the main reasons we really can't get on top of it and why it's pretty much ubiquitous across the refuge and across Western Pennsylvania. There's virtually no native herbivores that feed on the plant. So that's why we're bringing in the goats. And as Gavin said, it forms these dense, impenetrable thickets that are really hard for us to get into, to even treat ourselves without getting shredded to pieces. So the goats can get into those areas and then we can get into those areas after them. Multiflora rose prefers full sunlight, but the site that we're going to be talking about is shaded, and multiflora rose can get into these areas because it has this evolutionary advantage where it can produce really good sugar reserves that allow it to persist in these shady areas where it may not be able to photosynthesize as productively. But that's what really allows it to encroach into these understory areas in forests that we have on our site. So this is the site I'll be talking to you guys about today. It's a forested site that was a former farm field. It's transitioned into a young forest, but it has a range of trees of different ages. Most of them are young. Most of them are either black cherry, red maple, hawthorn, or ironwood. The understory of this site is heavily infested with not only multiflora rose, but some of the other invasives that goats like to eat, like garlic mustard, bush honeysuckle, and also Japanese barberry. The site is situated on a bit of a slope, so that also helps us with respect to the goats and their access to the site. So on the left, you can see the grid map that we used to determine the multiflora rose percent cover at the site, and it was heavy. Over most of the grids that you can see are over 25% cover, and that's why we chose this site, is because it was so heavily infested and it could support a goat troop being there for a month. So on your right-hand side are the different units that the goats are in during their duration with us. The average size of the unit is about 0.5 acres in size, but the small ones range to a third of an acre. The large ones, like Unit 10, are about a sixth of an acre, or three-fourths of an acre. So these were our management objectives for the site. We were trying to reduce the amount of multiflora rose cover in plots that were grazed over multiple years by 60 to 80%. In plots that were previously ungrazed, we were trying to get a 30% reduction in multiflora rose stem density. And then in areas that we were also performing a herbicide treatment on top of the goat grazing treatment, we were trying to reduce multiflora rose stem density to less than 10% of its original cover. And then in addition to those management objectives, we are trying to obviously allow native understory plants to come back and be able to compete with these invasives. And we were trying to protect the water quality by reducing our herbicide use. I didn't mention this on the previous slide, but there is a small stream that runs through the site. So as you can see on the previous slide, that's why we don't have any units in that area, is because it's wet and the goats can't access that area. So the team that we have been working with the last 5 years is Team Diamond. That's the name of their guardian donkey. The troop has ranged between 12 and 14 goats during the duration that they've been with us each year. And it's got these 4 breeds. They all have different personalities. They graze at different heights. So that's great. And they hang out with each other and with their own breeds. And then they're with us for about a month duration, so 4 weeks. Usually from early July to early August, though that has changed between the years. So I'll just play a little video for you of them grazing on the site. Sorry that there's no volume associated with this. So that was one of our sites. That was about partway through them being in that unit. So as you can see, it's a little bit grazed and pretty clear at the moment at that unit. But I'll talk to you guys a little bit about the process now. So goat grazing doesn't address the seed bank issue. Yes, they can consume the multiflora rose seeds, but the actual plants can produce over 500,000 seeds per year. That's dropping into the soil. The goats can't get at that, neither can we. So what goats are doing here on the site, they're browsing and stripping the leaves and the bark off the multiflora rose. They're defoliating the shrubs up to a certain height, because goats can really only reach up to 5 feet unless they can get on the tree. So they can defoliate them, but the way that we are killing the multiflora rows on the site is through two main pathways. So the first is reducing the energy reserves that are stored in the roots of the plant. That process is called carbohydrate starvation. And the second process is limiting the ability of the plant to photosynthesize through defoliation, or the goats eating the leaves of the plant. So the recommendations for this are to effectively control multifloras. You need to do this through several seasons of grazing. And then the most effective process of eliminating it is by coming back and then treating it either mechanically or through herbicide. But again, we're trying to limit herbicide use at this site. So that complicates and hinders our ability to fully effectively treat it. Let's see. So this is pictures of the goat grazing treatments from the goat troop, year 1 through year 5. The first year was a little bit different from the subsequent 4, in that the goats were there for 12 weeks, and we were able to double up on some units. They were able to come back twice to graze later in the season again. But the subsequent years, we didn't have the time to make that possible because they were only there for about 4 weeks. And these were the units we were able to do in that time. They spend about 3 to 5 days in each unit, depending on the size and the density. This is the chemical treatments that we performed each year, in addition to the goat grazing. So in the first year, we did a little bit of cut stump treatment and foliar spraying. 2020 was COVID, so limited work there. But years 3 through 5, we did foliar spraying in our units 8 and 9, which are in the bottom right corner. So a little bit about the cost for those of you out there who are interested in this type of project. Team Diamond's got a weekly cost that we organized with Gavin, but we basically needed to come up with our own supplies for the project. Most of that was the one-time purchases that include the electric fencing that we need, the battery for charging that fencing, their canopy tent, and anything else associated with that. And then there's the annual expenses that include the supplemental food that we do give to the goats daily, which includes a little bit of treats for them, and hay for Diamond, the guardian donkey. And then there is a bit of staff time associated with this too. So it takes us about 4 to 6 hours to clear the fencing paths. And this is a forested site with a lot of multiflora rows, so that takes a lot of time and energy. And then we do come back daily to check in on the goats for 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what needs to be done, to provide the medicine if they need it, to give them treats, to refill water, all of that. So the overall initial costs of the project come out to that amount shown. But after the first year, subsequent years are pretty low, since the gear is maintained and keep that in good health, so that it's cheap for us to go forward. So, I talked a little bit about that process, but there are operational challenges associated with this project. So, the browsing unit preparation takes a lot of time. And me as the biologist at the refuge, I don't have a lot of time. So we try and clear out as large lanes as we can within our forest patch to place the fencing and make sure that the fencing isn't touching any vegetation, because then that'll short circuit the flow of the energy. We also put predator eyes on the fencing to make sure that things like deer can see the fence at night and avoid it. In addition to the herd maintenance that we talked about, we're looking for safety issues in the unit. So we're removing recently fallen black cherry trees. We're making sure that our units don't contain large chunks of skunk cabbage or false hellebore, so that the goats don't want to eat. We're looking to remove snags or crevices or dead trees that could be hazards, that goats could, get stuck in or, potentially injured by. So we're removing those trees. And the fencing just takes time to maintain. It's a little bit cumbersome. It's difficult when you're working on an incline. and it needs a good charge to be effective and to dissuade the goats from pushing through it. So that's why we come back daily to check on it, remove vegetation, so that we keep that circuit strong. And then obviously, with the 12 odd units that we've got at our project site, we are frequently transferring the goats between units. So setting up all of that electric fencing can take a lot of time. We do that every 3 to 5 days again. We're moving goats between adjacent units to reduce our workload, but sometimes we have to move them across the area. We generally try to set up the subsequent fencing unit a couple days beforehand so that it's easier when we're ready to do it. But the difficult goats like the dwarf Nigerians are spunky and mischievous, so they can make that challenging. But we do get a lot of help from, like I said, our seasonal interns and our youth conservation crew members. So I'm going to pass the screen on to Rich at this point. And I'll just tell you guys a little bit of background on that. Our former biologist, by happenstance, was already starting this project, and a student of Rich's in his forestry class was talking about methods for treating invasives, and they were looking into and researching using goats to manage invasives in forests. And then he found out from Melissa that we were already starting year 1 of this project, and then this collaboration came about, and he can talk to you guys more about that now.
Alrighty. Yeah, and as Yianni just said, it was a little bit serendipitous how we dropped into this. In a previous class, students had worked with Melissa to assess invasive species in a variety of locations, including a couple at the Refuge, and found that, yeah, there were a couple spots that were really walloped, including the one here at the Refuge that we'll be talking about. Ultimately, this ended up in a paper, and I see a couple of the other students who were students at the time were authors on this paper, on this call, as well as Melissa, which is wonderful. So I'm glad she's here because she was really a lot of the brains and energy behind getting this initially started and passing the torch on to the Refuge and those of us involved. I think one thing I might say before we even jump into numbers and data and effectiveness is just the importance of collaboration. I think Gavin touched on that in a sense, talking about how important his operation is in its dependence upon volunteers. And the Refuge has long been a wonderful partner for Allegheny College and lots of our students in environmental science program here. So we've looked at lots of different things. So when we were looking at invasive species at a variety of locations, the Refuge is one where we wanted to work. And then eventually, when we found out from Melissa that they brought the goats on after she was successful in getting a grant to help work on this, we jumped in and said, you know, I think we can help you in going out to assess in a scientific way how effective it was. Clearly, all the pictures that Yianni has shown you and Gavin have shown shows pictorially that they are amazingly effective. But we wanted to get in and measure that and see if that held true. It was a bit challenging because this was set up as a management effort, not as a scientific study. Now, if we were setting this up as a science study, we would have had all sorts of control plots and treatment plots, etc. And while those were there, they weren't exactly set up in the way one might set it up as a very neat and clean field experiment. But we were able to be creative and come up with some ways to show that at least after year 1, the goats were being quite effective. Let's jump to the next one there, Yianni. Next slide. But we came in and we measured a number of things. Actually, go back one slide. Let me just mention where we're going to go on this little trip. We measured the amount of looked at stem height, the mass of the stems, the leaf to shoot ratio, which I'll explain in a minute why that's important. Then we want to know if the goats were changing the light availability on the ground. And Gavin already explored the importance of that in thinking about new trees being planted. If there's no light, as the rose takes up so much of the available light, blocks it out from being at the ground level, nothing else is going to come. And then we wanted to see if the goats were having an effect on other things there as well. So we looked at other plant abundance, and we'll look at those data. And then finally, we looked at something we hadn't expected to look at initially, and that was trees munching away on the bark of the trees at the site. All right, now you go to the next slide. All right, so ignore the graph on the left because I was looking in this after we uploaded it. There's something amiss in those data. But what I can tell you is we did find that the goats ate the stems about half the size, from about on average 79 centimeters to somewhere around 50 in the browsed sites, and about the same where it was browsed and herbicided. Where it was cut, of course, hand cut, those were shorter. So the first thing we noticed was that all the stems were shorter. All right, next. And this is where it became important and involved some creativity on our site to see the effectiveness of the plant. And as Yianni said, what we're trying to do is starve the carbohydrates from these plants. And we do that, the goats do that by taking away the leaves, the ability of the leaves to photosynthesize and store carbohydrates, which leads to the long-term energy reduction in the plant. So what we're looking at here is a leaf to stem ratio. And in the reference, we see there's a lot of leaves per unit stem. Numbers aren't critical, but about 5 leaves per stem. Again, this is on a mass basis, but you can see the browse, it's about half. So what they're doing is taking away the photosynthetic machinery of the plants. And that's how we're starving them out so that they can't store carbohydrates into the roots. Browsed and herbicided, we see also a reduction. It wasn't quite as much, but a lot of variation across the site. And then we see the same in the cut and herbicided. So the good news is they're decreasing the height of the plants. They're taking the leaves off the plants. We did notice that counting the number of stems, at least at the first year, wasn't very useful because they weren't pulling them out of the goats weren't pulling the plants out of the ground. So the stems were still there. So stem density per se in the short run doesn't tell you anything. It's more on what they're doing to the plants that are there. Next. There was a little bit of response by the plants. So by the time we were measuring into September and October, the goats were gone for about a month, and in that time, rows had popped out with a few more new shoots. So in the browsed plants, they did pop out a few new leaves, but it wasn't terribly extensive. But we did note that as expected, multiflora rose is pretty nasty stuff and pretty pervasive. So it was popping out with a few new leaves. Next. Then other things, as I mentioned, we looked at, we did find that there were no real difference in light levels. It was highly variable when we looked at light levels, but there was no dramatic increase in light at the forest floor level with the loss of multiflora rose. And that's probably because at ground level in an intact forest, you're only getting 5% of total light that you would get in open sunlight anyway. So even though you remove that 1 meter of multiflora rose canopy, it didn't dramatically change the overall light level reaching the floor. And then we wanted to see, because we're interested in biodiversity here, was there an effect on other plants besides the multiflora rose? Because the goats can go after everything. But we did find, we found no difference between browsed and the reference plants, which was good. Those sites. So goats were not reaching deep down and pulling out other plants. We didn't identify species. We just looked to see what other plants were available. In the places though where the plants or multiflora rose have been cut and then herbicide treated, there was a decrease in the number of other plants. And again, that was only after the first year. So that might be something that from a management sense, we need to pay attention to. Next. And then, of course, there's unintended consequences. And as you saw in previous slides, and you can see here that the goats were happy to eat the rose, but they were happy to munch on anything else they could put their lips on. And here you can see them munching away on the bark of trees. So we came back in later that year, a different class, and looked at the trees across the plots, all the different various treatments. And if we put all those data together, we can see that there's a variable response in what the goats like to eat. So things, for example, like apple up on the top, most of them were untouched. And if we drop down to black cherry, we see didn't touch them very much. And that makes sense. Those trees have very rough bark. But if we jump to red maple, we can see only about 30% of the trees were not touched. and a largest fraction there were completely girdled. So 25% of the trees had the bark completely girdled, which would suggest that those trees might be dying. And that's what we're going to go back and actually next week we'll take the class out and we'll assess here now after 5 years. So from a management sense, that is something that will need to be considered. You'll have to look and see what trees are available or on site, and if the goats are going to go after the trees as well. Do you protect them? Do you care if they browse them? I'll say in this case, for example, red maple is ubiquitous. It's overrepresented across the state of Pennsylvania. So there's probably no real concern in this particular site for the loss of red maple. But it does point out there can be unintended consequences that one needs to consider. All right, I think, Yianni, we're back to you.
Sounds good. So yeah, just to follow up on what Rich had said, yeah, we don't have a lot of rare tree species at the site that we're concerned about. So that's not something that we'll really factor in our monitoring going forward. So just to summarize everything that happened on the site, Team Diamond has returned for 5 years, and this was their final year of grazing this past summer. We're going to repeat our year 1 study that Rich and his class did in the fall of 24, which will be year 6, excuse me. And that'll be when we try and figure out and determine if goat grazing has actually produced any lasting beneficial results. And then from there, we'll try and assess the long-term plans for the unit. So this is just comparing, and it's hard to see the difference. Year 2's Multiflora rows cover with year 5's cover based on the grid mapping methods that we've used with our staff. It's hard to see whether there is a difference, but on this next slide, you can see that it's a bit of a mixed bag using the methods that we used to try and see whether there was a lasting change. So red on the map is where Multiflora rows appeared to increase, blue is where it appeared to decrease, and gray is where we didn't see much change. Like I said, our grid mapping methods aren't great at capturing those finer scale metrics like stem density, like light penetration. So that's why we're relying on Rich's class to help us figure that out. And it's hard to decipher those patterns related to the treatments. So grazing versus the herbicide. The herbicide sprayed units show both increases and decreases in Multiflora rows cover using the methods that we used. So it's hard for us to parse out if the herbicide treatment actually was effective on top of the goat grazing. So to summarize our project, through a 5-year partnership with Allegheny GoatScape, we used goat grazing to improve habitat value. And though the degree of the improvement is still, remains to be seen fully and quantified, we're pretty confident that there was a change and a positive one. In this whole process, we also were able to engage with hundreds of members of the public through guided tours that we've given out, through newspaper articles, and on social media platforms. And that's important to us because we need the public to understand the management that we're doing on the refuge and to support the management that we're doing on the refuge. So it was a main component of this project as well, to get people out there and get their eyes on it, to see the good work that the service has done here. So we are going back and we are achieving some of our original management objectives. We did limit our herbicide use. We saw some decreases in the percent cover of multifloras within the units that saw multiple years of grazing. We had some unintended consequences. So the goats had negative effects on the trees by girdling them. But we did see some species of native plants coming back in the area. They were in low amounts, but we saw species like trilliums, blue cohosh, cardinal flower, white turtlehead. Those were starting to pop back up, but it was hard to tell, if there were going to be any more changes beyond that. It's hard to tell if the native seed bank may be too low to allow those native plants to recolonize the area that was so heavily infested quickly enough that they catch up before Multiflora comes back again. So that's hard to to measure using our methods. So that's part of what we're going to quantify next year. But we've got some lessons learned from that and some takeaways. So, similar studies have shown that the greatest reduction in multiflora rose cover can occur when you've got grazing treatments that are split across 2 grazing periods in a growing season. Like I said, most years we weren't able to even do that. We only had 4 weeks to make this happen. So we weren't fully effective at treating the multiflora rose that we had, at least using the most effective method. During grazing, within repeated grazing units, we saw a decrease in that duration. So the first years that we did this, goats were in a unit for about 5 days, but come year 4 and 5, it was taking them 3 days to get through a unit. So anecdotally, the goats were going through the area at a quicker pace, which means there were probably less biomass for them to eat there. So that's positive sign that things are working here. Grazing may need to be followed up by focused chemical treatments. So, we might need to get back to some areas that have heavy multiflora rose cover and treat them with herbicide to really make this restoration of this area, effective fully, so that the native understory can regenerate. But we're looking into some options for the future that includes supplementing the native seed bank that's there with transplants. So we're specifically looking into shade tolerant ferns that can really cover the understory and rapidly spread. They're not that beneficial in that sense, but if they can cover the ground of the forest, then they can at least crowd out the invasive multiflora rose and give the native understory flowering plants a chance at competing. And we're also going to look at putting in some trees in the area as well, like hazelnut, black walnut, and American beech. So with that said, that's the end of our presentation. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you all. That was really great. And as you guys have been seeing, there's a lot of questions that have been coming through. I know we're a little bit over 11 o'clock, but I do want to take just a little bit of time and try to go over some of the questions because I think the answers might be relevant to more than just the person that was asking. So we'll take about 5 minutes or so and go through as many questions as we can. I know some of the questions, Gavin, you had already answered, but just for purposes of having them said aloud for others, I'm going to go through and just say those here. So first question was from Brad. He asked, have you or any of your colleagues ever considered Department of Transportation work or partnered with DOT for associated invasive management studies, focusing on overgrown stormwater facilities, primarily fenced basins and right-of-ways?
Yeah, just to go off what Gavin's answer was, we'd be interested in that sort of thing too, but we have not pursued that type of partnership yet.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy had asked, do the goats eat mile a minute? And if so, have you utilized them for the removal of this species?
Yeah, we definitely have, specifically in Frick Park in Pittsburgh. We partner with the Park Conservancy there to target that, and bush honeysuckle was another one in the spot, and actually eat it up in order to plant various restoration plants and deer exclosures. But the mile minute was there, and the goats do love to eat it.
Okay, thank you. And then similar question, but for Japanese barberry from Laura. Will the goats eat Japanese barberry, or are the needle-like thorns too much even for the goats?
Yeah, it is similar because they have such sharp needles. So they'll eat a little bit, and it's not, goats actually do have a preference with the foods they like. And barberry is generally a little lower, but they will eat it, especially if it's in high density and there's not a lot of other things there.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. A question came in from D. Is there a way to use large or long tree tubes on a replanted site to allow the goats to do a year 2 and 3 treatment?
I would say it's worth testing that with a few trees maybe that you're willing to sacrifice. But honestly, if it's a tree that's tasty to them, more than likely they're going to figure out how to remove that tube and then eat it. We've done that, and we put up a tree tube with a white pine, and the goats within a week had it well gone, and they were able to pull off the multi rings of cover and just eat it up because they really wanted it.
Mhm.
You're
And they're
very
really
determined.
strong.
Yeah, and smart. They're smart too.
Okay, thank you. Carrie had asked, she says, I have a curiosity about the breed and age of goats that you select and how long do they work typically?
Yeah, Yianni touched on kind of what kind of goats we have, but we range from small ones like Nigerian dwarfs to large, typically dairy goats like Alpines and Nubians. We do have a few La Manchas, which are similar in size to those bigger ones, and then boars, a few mixed breeds as well. I should note that all of our goats are either female or wethers, meaning they're castrated males. That's because we don't want to breed. And a lot of our goats are coming from dairy farms, or sometimes they were previously pets. And so they're kind of serving as second careers. We do keep them working. There's not a lot of information out there about end of life for goats. So we do keep them working, but we're very, one of our, my staff is just monitors health. That's kind of her primary job. And so, you know, if we see one showing their age or with physical vulnerabilities, we definitely are recognize that and kind of pull them off a site if need be. But for the most part, they're working well. And we have created an elder, I think I mentioned it before, the golden goats. It's kind of our geriatric herd. And so they're doing easier projects, so to speak, flatter, and maybe not as intensive. Yeah, we keep them working because honestly, it's either that or by themselves. And since goats are such a social animal, it's good to keep them with their friends.
Love it. And I love the golden goats. That's so cute. We had a question and comment come through from Melissa Althouse, who used to work there at the Refuge and was part of this project early on. She commented, I love how the project has continued to flourish. Great job, guys. And then her question about how many cumulative acres do you think has been browsed at Erie National Wildlife Refuge so far? And have you seen any surprise understory species popping back up after being released from the Multiflora rows?
So yeah, I answered a part of that question earlier. We have seen low amounts of these flowering plants like trilliums, cohosh, cardinal flower, and white turtlehead start to pop up. They're in really low amounts, which kind of signals to me that the seed bank is pretty low for these native plants. But they're popping up in places. And regarding the amount of cumulative acres that have been browsed at Erie, we've been doing about 4.5 to 5 acres per year with this project. Though there was one other year where we had some extra time and moved them over to eat a heavily infested bush honeysuckle area. That was another 5 acres or so. So in all, we've probably done about 30 acres over the last 5 years.
Okay, thank you. We have time for just a few more questions and then we'll wrap things up. A popular question, everyone wanted to know about the guardian donkey. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the guardian donkeys are there kind of as insurance. Donkeys have an innate distrust of canines. And so, and they also have a similar, they can eat a lot of similar things that the goats eat. So they're good in that way that when we're on site and the goats are eating the donkey's able to eat the same types of vegetation for the most part. We usually supplement with hay as well if need be, but for the most part, they can eat a lot of the same things. But they just it's not taught, but they just do not like dogs. If they were to grow up with a dog, like on the farm or whatever, they would probably be fine with that dog. But otherwise, they just do not trust it. Now, they also know the barriers of the fence. So a lot of spaces we're in are in public spaces with a lot of dog walkers. The donkeys are generally not bothered by anything outside the fence. They might give an evil eye, but that's the extent of it. But should a dog get inside their space, they just have an innate sense to protect the rest of their herd. And they would kick, they would bite. And so knock on wood, nothing happens. But I have seen in one of the parks in Pittsburgh, an off-leash dog jumped the fence, and our donkey immediately sprang into action by ensuring that the goats were protected first and in a safe space. The donkey actually rounded them up and then went to go after the dog. Thankfully, I was there, was able to get the dog out, but that's just kind of their natures. That's what they're there for doing. And so it's, again, an insurance thing. The one herd we have that does not have a donkey is because the previous owners of the herd didn't use a donkey, but they were doing similar work. So we decided not to add a donkey to them. But
I might throw in that in this area, there's a lot of coyotes. So especially around the refuge. So urban areas certainly they have them also.
Yes.
But,
yeah, that's exactly it. Coyotes more than actual pet dogs, but an aggressive off-leash dog could pose problems too.
And
Great, thank
thankfully,
you.
we
That's
haven't
really
had any issues with coyote during the 5 years of our project, though we did have a couple deer run into the fencing.
Yes.
In 2 years.
Yep.
I'd be surprised if you didn't. Sorry, we had a question come in from Krista. Do you leave the goats in place overnight? So kind of in relation to your question of protecting the herd, and how do you protect them from predators and humans if that is what you do?
Yep. Yeah, they're definitely there overnight. It'd be wildly inefficient not to, because goats actually do work around the clock, especially in hotter weather. They're probably as active, if not more active at night than during the day. And given our limited capacity, we could not bring goats in and out daily. And so they do stay there. The fence is meant as the prime protector. Where there's a donkey, of course, that's also the protector. But again, knock on wood, nothing's happened, and we don't anticipate it happening. But yeah, we just keep them there until they're done with their job.
Okay, great. And one more question, Rich, I think you're actually in the process of answering this one right now, from Emily. How much of a concern is spread of browsed invasive species when the herd is moved to a new site via digestion of viable seeds?
Nothing we looked at directly, but I came across as we were writing up the paper that others have looked at seed viability after it passes through goats, and very low viability. Gavin, you might be able to add some more to that.
Yeah, I was on a panel a few years ago, and somebody did research from University of Minnesota, I believe Twin Cities. I'm forgetting her name. I apologize to her, but she actually put diapers on goats with buckthorn and found that it was less than 1% viability from the goats, or from the seeds that were ingested from glossy buckthorn. And so it's very, very low. And then another process we do is remove seeds from the goats before they travel, or during travel, so they're not spreading it as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So we will have to wrap things up here. Sorry if we weren't able to answer your question that came through. We did have a lot of really great ones. But please feel free to reach out to our presenters if you do have a burning question that you'd like to have answered. We have the contact information here on the screen for Rich, Gavin, and Yianni, so please feel free to email them directly if you'd like to. So thanks again, all three of you. This was really great, fantastic presentation and very interesting. So thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too.